Back to One American Baseball Podcast. You're joining us for episode 23. I'm Jaden, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, Chris. It's been an up and down week of baseball for Chris. I think for myself, I've had a much better week as far as baseball goes. But Chris, I know you've got quite a few complaints that you want to get into. But aside from the Guardians and their recent performance, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing okay. It's Monday. Yeah, I'd say I would rephrase what you said to downs and not necessarily ups, but yeah, there are a couple of silver linings I'll get into towards the end. But yeah, this has not been a pretty week of baseball for my Guardians
Yeah, I feel like we've maybe switched roles a little bit as far as our baseball teams go.
for sure.
I think I'm used to being the sort of down in the dumps baseball fan out of the two of us, and you're usually riding pretty high about the Guardians at this point in the season. So weird to see those roles reversed. I'm not complaining on my end. I would like to see the Guardians play better for your sake. And I think we'll get that'll take us into our weekly takeaways here, and we'll start with your Guardians.
Yeah, so I'll start first off by saying that Gabriel Arias had a pretty brutal looking injury yesterday. They they always do this with guys who get injured. They x-ray them like an hour after they get injured. And of course nothing comes up because when you take an x-ray, it takes like usually a day or two for anything to show up. He didn't
Mhm.
break his ankle, at least from when that x-ray came back, but it came up negative, but he got carted off the field. And I think that, if you can't walk off the field under your own power, you're going to be out for at least a couple months. And we're not exactly early in the season anymore. I think that he'll be out, if not for the rest of the season, for the until like September or something. That looked like a pretty brutal injury. If you look closely, his ligaments look pretty destroyed. So, I'm not feeling too good about Gabriel Arias. I hope he has a speedy recovery, and I know that's scary for his teammates and friends and family and stuff. So, all the best wishes for Arias. And next thing I want to get into is Chris Antonetti. He spoke in front of the press a couple days ago, and it went kind of as expected. He didn't really. It was a 19-minute press conference. I actually watched it yesterday, and I was super sleepy. It ended up putting me to sleep. But what I got from it was that the Guardians are kind of waiting until the trade deadline to make any final decisions on what they're going to do with the roster. They're sort of trusting the guys that they have. They think that the team hasn't played to its potential yet, yada yada yada. Um, it was a lot of buzzwords, and the most useful things that he did say during that press conference were an update on Travis Bazzana. So he's starting his rehab process in Arizona. So hopefully Travis Bazzana will be back within the next month or so. He talked about Shane Bieber, and Shane Bieber's still doing well. Trevor Stephan is almost back. So he did have some helpful updates as far as injuries go, but as far as the outlook of the team, he was just being a good PR guy and not really saying anything while rambling on for 19 minutes. So yeah, that was about as expected. Um, but yeah, this team point blank has turned into a complete disaster. The, something I think drastic is going to have to change if the Guardians even want a chance at the playoffs. They're only a few games out of the wild card right now, as we speak. But I, yeah, like I said, this team is going to have to play a lot better. And the way that they've played this past month, they're going to have a long summer if things keep going that way. They blew a 6-1 lead on Saturday against the Cardinals, which would never ever happen last year. There have been so many things that have happened this season so far, and I'll get kind of into it. We'll do a larger segment that's kind of about the overarching themes from the season. But yeah, to put it shortly, this kind of thing would have never happened last year. The Guardians have been swept, I believe, 4 times now on the season. This time last year, they hadn't been swept, and they've only scored in one inning out of the last 4 games. That is, I don't know if the Guardians have had that bad of a stretch since I have been a fan of this team. And I've seen some not bad, like I've seen a couple of bad seasons, but I've certainly seen this team not be good. And obviously the Guardians were shut out in 3 of the last 4 games. I'm sure there are some teams that haven't even been shut out 3 times this year. So That is really alarming. That's really all I have for my weekly takeaways. So nothing
Yeah,
super positive.
it's gonna be shorter weekly takeaways this week.
Yeah.
We just passed the halfway point in the season, so we're gonna do a bigger sort of first half takeaway segment here in a little bit. I will get into my weekly takeaways for my Red Legs, though. The first one being Chase Burns made his MLB debut. I know we talked about it last week, and he went out there and did the thing uh, against the Yankees. It was a pretty good debut, all things considered. I mean, he's facing one of the most potent lineups in the MLB, I would say, with guys like Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, Trent Grisham, Ben Rice, a lot of guys in that lineup who can take you deep. And when you're playing them at GABP, that's even more of a threat. Although Yankee Stadium probably just as hitter friendly of a ballpark. But yeah, really good debut from Chase Burns. Struck out the first five hitters he faced, which was pretty cool to see. He got Aaron Judge to bite on two really good sliders in Judge's first at bat. He went 5 innings, 3 earned runs, 8 strikeouts, and 0 walks. Now the 3 earned runs in 5 innings, it inflates his ERA a little more than the story. I think the story goes a little bit deeper than just his ERA. He two of those runs scored on him on some questionable outfield defense. TJ Friedel tried to make a diving catch, failed to keep the ball in front of him. It was a 2 run triple. So, you know, it might end up being a case where only one of those runs scores or none of them scores. He made one real mistake on a pitch to Ben Rice, and Rice took him deep on that. But other than that, he looked really, really good. He, after the game, said that he thinks he could have gone deeper than just 5 innings, but the team is trying to be smart with his innings and how they manage those. So they pulled him after five. He starts again tonight against the Red Sox. I think it'll be interesting to see if we see him go any deeper than five, or if they stick with that pretty strict innings limit, just to make sure that they don't overuse him. We saw it with Paul Skeens last year when he got called up. The Pirates were managing his innings pretty close, and it seems like the Reds are going to do a pretty similar thing. This next one isn't so much of a takeaway. It's not like, something that I noticed watching the team this week, but I think it's worth talking about. I think we'll probably get more into depth in this whole topic in an episode probably next week. But Ellie was snubbed from the All Star game. I mean, he'll probably still make the All Star game, but he was not top two in fan voting, so he won't get the chance to start. So fan voting determines the top two at each position, and then out of that pool, the starter is determined. So the top two NL shortstops in fan voting were Frankie Lindor and Mookie Betts. If you pull those guys up on Baseball Reference and compare them to Ellie is having a better season than both of them in every offensive category. So average, slugging, on base percentage, OPS, OPS plus, RBIs, home runs, you name it, he's better than them in it. He's put up zero point 0.5 more WAR than Betts and zero point 0.3 more WAR than Frankie Lindor. So, I think it speaks to how ridiculous fan voting can be sometimes. He's getting better by the day too. He had one of the best at bats of his career yesterday, I think, against Robert Suarez in the ninth inning. Robert Suarez leads the NL in saves. He might lead all of MLB, but I know he leads the NL. He put together a 10 pitch at bat. He had some great takes, fouled off a couple tough pitches, and then blooped a single the other way to get on base and start the rally for the Reds yesterday in the ninth. And so, like I said, I think it just proves again why fan voting is such a ridiculous thing and why MLB needs to maybe look at doing away with it, or, revising it in some way, because these large market teams get all the votes and it leaves a lot of deserving players either off the team or left on the bench at the start of the game. And, the All Star game isn't everything. It really doesn't matter a whole lot in the scheme of a player's career whether or not you were an All Star game starter, because it's just a measure of how well you performed for like the first couple months of the season. But there are guys who deserve to be recognized on that national scale, especially guys from small market teams who don't get a lot of love in the broader baseball media because they just aren't one of those large market teams that gets the clicks and the likes and all of that. And so, you see these guys who deserve this attention and then they don't get it because of fan voting. One of those cases I think is Jonathan Aranda for the Rays this year, probably definitely having the best first base season in the AL, and he was not top two in fan voting. So like I said, Ellie isn't the only player to be snubbed by the large market sort of fan voting thing. But it's the forefront example in my mind because, I'm a Reds fan. I keep up with the Reds. I see these sorts of things. So, but like I said, I think we're going to touch on that more probably next week. And then my last big weekly takeaway is that the thing that's sort of been talked about a lot in Reds country since this good streak of baseball has started is a top step mentality, is what they're calling it. So there was a players only meeting a couple of weeks ago when the Reds were still not going great. I mean, they were floating right around 500, but it felt like there was a lot of unrealized potential there. And Jose Trevino and Gavin Lux were the big two that were sort of leading that meeting. And they talked about being involved in the game when other guys are at the plate, being on that top step of the dugout, watching the at bats. You're not on the iPad on the bench watching your swings or your at bats. You're engaged in the game. You're rooting for your teammates. You're cheering for your teammates at the top step, and you're not so much focused on what you did in your last at bat that led to whatever result that was. And I think you can really tell that the difference this has made for this team. There's more energy. I feel like we've seen three walk-offs in the last 11 days, I think. So it just feels like this team has more energy, more positive energy. And it feels like they're battling more in these close games when it gets late. I mean, yesterday was a great example of that. We walked off the Yankees this past week too. I mean, two walk-offs in one week, you're battling for your teammates. They're taking better at bats and they're trusting the guys behind them instead of trying to do everything themselves, which is something we talked about last week that makes a successful lineup is, you don't you don't push to do everything yourself. You let your teammates do some of the work. I assume that some of this has to do with, you watch the pitcher on that day and you're not really worried about scouting reports or what the analytics say as much. Scouting reports are great, but they can only do so much. A pitcher might not be able to spot a pitch that day, or, he's struggling to spin the breaking ball. And so you get a better idea of what the pitcher has on that day by watching the game as opposed to going over the analytics on the iPad or something like that. So when you're really engaged in the game, you see what the pitcher can actually throw that day. You're able to better sit on his approach because the pitcher is game planning for this game too. He's going to have a different approach game to game based on the lineup he's facing. So you can watch him pitch to your teammates and you sort of know what their game plan is for this game. I think, the difference that veteran players have can't be overstated. And I think this is a prime example of it. And, Gavin Lux and Jose Trevino are still relatively young guys as far as their career goes. But in the Reds clubhouse, they're veterans because of how young this team is. And both of them have seen success. They were both playing in the World Series last year. And so you bring in these veteran players who've seen success and you see what difference that can make in a clubhouse. They bring the things they learned on a winning team onto a team that maybe has struggled to see that success, and you start to build a winning culture and make the necessary changes so that you can be one of those teams like the Dodgers or the Yankees that's fighting for a World Series title at the end of October. And I don't know if the Reds are going to be doing that this year. I'll touch on it in my first half takeaways that they're starting to make me believe a little bit more than I maybe would like to, but you can see the difference these guys are making in games where, yeah, it's not do or die, but they're games that you feel like you should win, where late, this team is battling for their teammates, they're trusting their teammates, and they're taking really good at bats. And I think, the front office, while I've maligned them a lot the last couple episodes, they did a great thing by bringing in Gavin Lux and Jose Trevino. I think that's going to help out this team a lot as they continue to play for a playoff berth this season. And that's all I've got for my weekly takeaways. We'll get into some first half takeaways now. So the first half of the season concluded this weekend. We're through 81 games and we've got 81 or less to go. So Chris, what are your takeaways for your Guardians after the first half of the season?
Yeah, your conversation about the that kind of top step mentality you were talking about kind of remind me of the Guardians had a team only meeting as well earlier
Mm,
this week. I don't know what was said in the meeting. I don't know if it's sort of publicized what was said in the meeting, but I imagine that Hedgie was kind of leading the meeting.
Right.
And touching on, similar things that the Reds touched on, such as, being a little bit more involved in a game. I know for the Guardians' perspective, because I feel like the Guardians are a couple weeks, and this is being optimistic, maybe a couple weeks behind where the Reds are as far as, and
Right.
I think the Guardians are struggling a little bit harder than the Reds were a
Hmm.
couple weeks ago, but um, I think the Guardians are a couple weeks behind them in their sort of realization that, they could be playing a lot better baseball. There's fixable things on this roster that can't really it's a mindset thing. You need to
Right.
be bought into the larger purpose. But yeah, I think it's easy to lose sight of how like the analytics kind of run the game. You're on the iPad the whole game. You're overthinking, how do I change my approach for the next at bat? And it turns into not really supporting your teammates and not being there
Right.
and being present. So I think there definitely is a balance between that. And seeing the immediate results, the Guardians didn't see any immediate results. In fact, they got worse after that players only meeting. So I'm hoping that it takes a few days. They have an off day today, so hopefully they'll look like a different ball club tomorrow. But
Yeah.
I think that's wishful thinking at this point since they're playing the Cubs. But um, I'm kind of in the accepting stage of my grieving process so far. I think it was a quick grieving process for me. I was kind of in denial like a lot of the season. I was like, maybe the Guardians will overcome some of the struggles that they've experienced earlier on in the season, and they're gonna they weren't playing like themselves, but I
Right.
really think that they have been playing like themselves. They're just not that good this year is the issue. um there have been some pretty alarming stats from the Guardians so far this year. They're a bottom 10 offense overall. They're down to 27th in baseball in team OPS at a 664 OPS. That's worse than the 19 and 65 Rockies. I know the Rockies play at Coors Field and they have that advantage, but if your offense is worse than a 19 and 65 ball club, that's pretty alarming. Um, they're the Guardians have kind of prided themselves on being a really solid base running team, especially I think a few years ago they kind of developed their identity of going first to third on singles and stealing a bunch of bases. They had Jimenez, Straw, um, Ramirez, obviously some really smart base runners on the team. Stephen Kwan was his hamstring wasn't really messed up yet, so Kwan was a little bit more of a runner, but. This team is about average in baseball when it comes to all the base running metrics, but there was when I was researching kind of how the base runners have been doing. There's a stat called the average base running, or sorry, the extra bases taken run value. It's a metric that Baseball Savant has. So it takes the amount of times you've been thrown out, the amount of times you've advanced, um, and it basically a couple other factors, and it spits out like a solid number. And the Guardians are at zero. They're middle of the pack in this metric. So. Yeah, the takeaway is that they're an average base running team. They're the third worst defense in baseball in terms of errors per game. This defense has taken a massive step back from a year ago. I think part of it is the amount of utility guys that have been on the team. Daniel Schneemann, he's a good fielder, but I feel like him and Arias don't have the same kind of chemistry that Arias and Rocchio would have, or say like Jimenez and Rocchio, or Jimenez and Arias would have. Um, there's a lot of turnover on this team as far as defensive positions go. One day, Schneemann will be playing second base, he'll be playing shortstop, he'll be playing right field. Um, Arias will be playing third base some days. You had Will Wilson playing third some days, playing second some days. So. Um, I think it's been pretty hard for this team to really get a lot of chemistry built. So I think that's part of the issue. And then another part of it is Jimenez, being the platinum glover that he is, being out of the infield. I think that has really hurt this team a lot. Um, with that said, too, Carlos Santana has a Gold Glove pedigree. He's played like a Gold Glover so far this year, and Josh Naylor did not play very good defense last year. So there is first base, but yeah, this team defensively is not very good. It has been pretty bad all year, and it's preventable mistakes too. a lot of it is mental errors. It's not just these physical errors, but um, this team just isn't doing the little things, and that's something that in the past years the Guardians have really prided themselves on doing is taking care of the little things and preventing dumb mistakes like that from costing the game. And they've had a lot of those instances this year. Um, and kind of lastly, the bullpen has been really banged up. Cade Smith, it kind of seems like he's going to go on the IL. He's been on the day-to-day IL with back spasms, but it'll be interesting to see if he's activated for the Cubs series, if we're going to see him at all. But he's been out for a week plus now, so he'll probably have to go on the IL. Hunter Gaddis hasn't been as consistent this year. Clase has been fine. I'm gonna um, get into a possible Clase trade later on the episode, but yeah, Clase has been fine. Tim Heron hasn't really been as consistent as last year. And then kind of my two biggest complaints with this bullpen is that Matt Festa and Colby Allard, I don't think it's necessarily Stephen Vogt's fault, but I think that these two have been overused, especially with how many games that the Guardians have had where they've been down by, 3+ runs. They've kind of had to resort to Matt Festa and Colby Allard to take um, a lot of the work in this bullpen. And then you saw in like a 5-0 game, or in a 7-0 game, Clase had to get work yesterday because he hadn't pitched in almost a week. Hunter Gaddis came in and I think it was a 4-0 ball game and he gave up or it might have been a 3-0 ball game and he gave up a home run. Um, you had Tim Heron come in as well when it was a super low leverage appearance, and this team really thrived on their routine of, Heron, Gaddis, Smith, and Clase coming in the sixth or ninth in really any order. And this team would be up by a couple runs, and those four guys would hold a lead. And this offense has not been reliable enough to really maximize the potential of this bullpen. So I think everything's just out of whack this year. And that kind of brings me to sort of contemplating what the future of this team looks like. And it's really up in the air. Shane Bieber is probably going to be back within the next couple weeks. Um, Carlos Santana most likely will not be coming back. Going back to Shane Bieber, he's probably going to be gone next year. We're probably only going to see a few months of Shane Bieber. I don't know where he's going to sign, but it'll probably be to a larger market team. I'd be shocked if he stays in Cleveland next year. Lane Thomas is a free agent after this year, so I don't really see Thomas coming back. And then Quan and Clase have 2 more years under team control. So, you know, I, Jose is still in the prime of his career. He's 32. He's kind of nearing the end of his prime, I think. And I think it's really insulting to Jose Ramirez to not have a competitive team around him at this point. So I think this team is at a very difficult crossroads as far as what they want to do with buying or selling at the deadline. And we'll get into more of what we think our team's going to do at the trade deadline later. But Jose took uh, like hundreds of millions of dollars of a pay cut to stay in Cleveland, and we couldn't get a couple extra guys to build around Quan and Ramirez to kind of shore up that offense. A couple of bats come to mind are Gleyber Torres. I know that the Guardians were in the running for Gleyber Torres during the offseason, and then they kind of lost out to the Tigers. But I think that, with offloading Jimenez's contract, I think that gave the Guardians a little bit of breathing room that they could have gotten a guy like Gleyber Torres. Other guys that come to mind are Tyler O'Neill or Austin Hayes to maybe play some right field. Um, they've both those guys been. I think actually Tyler O'Neill might be injured, but I know Austin
He's
Hayes.
Tyler O'Neill. He might be hurt now. He's had a pretty rough go of it though this season. He's batting 188, 73
Oh,
OPS plus. So, I mean, he's a guy who, in theory would be good,
yeah.
but he having a rough year, and you sort of wonder if it's his environment. He's an Oriole and they're sort of struggling, and it's not a super hitter friendly ballpark over there. If you wonder if that's part of it, if he was a Guardian, would it be different? But yeah, pretty disappointing year from Tyler O'Neill. Austin Hayes has been good when he's been healthy,
Hmm.
but it's been an issue of health. So I don't know if the Guardians have been pretty unhealthy this year to begin with. So I wonder if
Yeah.
that, I mean, hindsight is 2020, of course,
Hmm.
though.
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of find the right answer for what this team should have done during the offseason. But I do think that this team should have made at least one more move to get a more proven bat in this lineup, a veteran bat, and to kind of take a lot of the at bats in second base and right field. I think that this team was pretty unprepared, especially at the second base position. Arias has really blossomed into a until he got injured yesterday, but he's really blossomed into a pretty solid MLB player. But I just have no idea what this team is going to do. Probably Schneeman's going to play the majority of shortstop going forward. But anyway, with those guys kind of moving on next year, Bieber, um, Lane Thomas, Santana, and then Kwan kind of with one foot out the door. I think at this point we're not going to extend Stephen Kwan. And then Clase kind of being a trade piece at the moment, a possible trade piece. Um, it's just hard to see this team not as a, te a team full of quad A players next year, honestly. It sounds kind of doom and gloom, but I can't see that reality not unfolding. Um, However, a silver lining is that the Guardians, I believe right now they're sitting at 40 and 42.
Yeah.
Starting starting July 11th, so next Friday, the Guardians play the White Sox, A's, Orioles, Royals, Rockies, Twins. The only good team they play in that month stretch is the Mets, and then they have the White Sox again, and then the Marlins after that. So that takes them into the middle of August. So the Guardians should be able to collect some wins during that stretch, and maybe they'll get back in the hunt for the wild card. But that is really the only silver lining that I could think of for this team going forward. So,
Yeah, I have a couple. Well, I have a thought on the short term sort of there, and then I have a question for you after
mhm.
that. But you know, the short term, you've got all those super easy teams, and you've got the All-Star break too, right smack in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So, that's always sort of a good reset point in the season. I think, some teams come out of the All-Star break really re-energized and they play their best baseball post All-Star break, and you can make a really good run post All-Star break. It's a 162 game season. You've got plenty of time. The Mets of last year come to mind as a team who was sort of faltering pre All-Star break. Jose Iglesias released a smash pop hit and sort of turned their season around at the All-Star break. And then you've got a team who, I guess, like the Reds is the example I use because I'm familiar with it. They always seem to be really hot in June, go into the All-Star break, and then fall flat on their face coming out of it. In 2023, they were, I believe they were leading the NL at the All-Star break, and then or the NL Central at the All-Star break, and things just fell apart after that. So there's another silver lining for our Guardians fan listeners is that maybe the All-Star break provides the reset this team needs and they're able to get back on track. Now, my question about second base for you is, do you think they were maybe expecting Travis Bazzana to be ready to take over the second base mantle at some point this season and that's why they didn't go and get a second baseman?
No, I think that they were kind of relying on a mixture of Gabriel Arias and Juan Brito to split
Mm,
time at second base. I don't think they were relying on Travis Bazzana to come up yet.
okay,
Yeah, there it's super like it's super rare, and when players are drafted, they probably shouldn't come up the year after they're drafted,
right.
with the exception of Paul Skeens. He's and maybe Chase Burns,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there are unicorns out there, but mostly everyone. And Spencer Torkelson is a great is a great um, uh,
Example.
example. Yes, he's a
Yeah,
great example of this because he was drafted 5 years ago, and then he was horrible for a couple of years. He was sent down the minor leagues last year, and then all of a sudden he's an all-star caliber player.
right.
So, um, yeah. Long story short, you don't see very many players just go right up to the big leagues and have immediate success. You see with Jack Caglione. He's off to a really rough start with the Royals, and he was tearing up the minor leagues.
Yeah,
So there's just a huge difference between AAA and MLB, and I think a lot of it comes down to approach and stuff.
right.
I think Travis Bazzana will have a little bit easier transition just because he has a little bit better approach at the plate than say like a
Uh-huh.
Jack Caglione or like couple of examples from the Guardians are like John Kenty Noel or Jonathan Rodriguez who tear up AAA, but once they get up to the big leagues, they're borderline useless. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah,
Okay, yeah. Interesting take. I'm glad I got to ask that because I think it's important to, consider all the options. I think, the Reds have been guilty of it in the past where they're sort of like, well, let's wait and see what this prospect does. Let's not do anything in the offseason and spend
Mhm.
unnecessary money when we have a prospect who could fill that role. And we've seen time and time again as Reds fans that it hasn't really worked out. We're seeing sort of the fruits of the rebuild at this point, but for a while there, it was really rough. So, I just think
Yeah.
it's interesting to get a perspective on that.
Yeah, and what you said about the Guardians kind of resetting about the All-Star break, like it made me think about the Mets last year when they had
Right.
Grimace throughout the first pitch.
Yeah.
The Guardians need some kind of a gimmick to come around to
Bring
just
some energy into the ballpark.
inject some energy in this team
Yeah.
because I've seen that this team has just been sleepwalking the past month. I've seen no energy out of this team,
Right.
with the exception of that walk-off that Jose had that was basically gifted to them, by the
Uh,
way. Um, I forget who pitched the ninth inning of that. I might have been Clase, but anyway, um, yeah, that was like the last game where the Guardians actually had any life to them, in my
yeah.
opinion. That was almost a week ago. So,
Yeah. Well, with the Guardians showing no life, I think it's a good transition to get into the Reds, who are showing quite a bit of life right now. And honestly, they're starting to make me believe, which I'm nervous for. I think as Reds fans, we're sort of conditioned to not expect anything good. And so now that I'm starting to expect something good out of the season, I'm really scared that my heart's going to get broken in August. But this team is showing a ton of fight. There was a roller coaster of emotions for me coming out of this Padres series that we played over the weekend. Friday night, after Friday night's game, I was ready to get my 2025 World Series champs tattoo with Mr. Redlegs. Nick Martinez goes eight no-hit innings, Spencer Steer 3 home run game against a team that you're battling with in the wild card race, and I mean it feels amazing. That win felt amazing. And then, you know, I was ready to come in here. Saturday's game didn't go well. Bullpen blew it, and I was ready to come in here pretty tempered with my expectations, I think is the word I'll use. Once, Saturday's game finished and then Sunday, I mean, I was typing up the outline as I'm watching the game Sunday and we're in the eighth inning and Will Benson hits a leadoff double and he doesn't get off second base. And I'm typing the outline, there's some hope with this team, but they just haven't shown enough fight and they aren't ready to compete yet, maybe 2026. And then the ninth inning rolls around and Will Benson walks it off, and I have to rewrite my entire section on how I feel about this team after the first half. And I know it's one game, but baseball's like that. It's a 162 game season, and yet game 82 will change your entire perspective on a season. They've won six of their last seven series against some very good teams. They've played the Yankees, the Padres, the Tigers, the Twins, the Guardians. They've played some really tough teams, some really good teams on paper, and they've won six of their last seven series against those teams, which is pretty impressive. But I think the next step is being able to compete against teams that are in their division and teams that they're fighting for that wild card spot against. So, teams like the Padres, teams like the Brewers, the Cubs, the Cardinals, uh, the Giants, the Mets, the Braves, teams like that. They're 15 and 19 in games against either teams in their division or teams that are ahead of them in the wild card race right now. They're 15 and 19 in those games. And it's been a problem in recent years. And I've mentioned it before on this podcast where we compete with bad teams. We compete with good teams outside of the division. I mean, you think back to last year, we were under 500 team. We swept the Dodgers and the Yankees at one point. So they're able to compete with good teams outside of the division or teams that are really good in the NL. But when it comes to teams in the NL Central or teams that are right there in the wild card race with them, they just haven't been able to compete. And so you wonder if maybe this Padres series is sort of a flipping of that script because they blow them out in game one. Game two, realistically, they could have won that game. And then game three, they show a lot of heart and fight and coming back to win that game with a walk off. You know, so I feel good and I'm I'm cautiously optimistic because there's still a lot of time for teams to collapse, and there's also a lot of time for teams to get hot. We're still in it. We haven't played ourselves out of it in the past month, which has been a pretty tough stretch of the schedule, probably the toughest stretch of the schedule that we're going to see from here on out. We've played some pretty good baseball against some pretty good ball clubs, but like I said, this team has historically come out of the All-Star break flat. You wonder if a new manager and sort of a new younger lineup changes that trend. But this team could collapse. Another team could get hot and blow past us in the wild card standings, and we're left there, an above 500 team, but we don't have a wild card spot because another team got really hot. Or, teams in front of us could collapse and we sneak into a wild card spot. I mean, the Mets are one of the teams in front of us in the wild card race, and they're 3-13 in their last 16 games. You think they'll turn it around because the Mets are a good ball club, but we've seen good ball clubs collapse in the past. I mean, I was looking at the wild card standings um, on this day last year, and the Cardinals were in a playoff spot, and the Cardinals ended up not making the playoffs. So there's a lot of time left, I think is what I'm trying to get at here. Sure, the Reds are playing good baseball now, and I hope it continues, but there's still so much time left for them to continue to play good baseball or start to play really bad baseball. And I think we've seen this team do both of those things, even just in the first half of the season. So I think it'll be interesting to see what team we see in the second half. Something that gives me hope for them playing good baseball is that we've got a lot of guys coming back soon from injury. We just got Austin Hayes back. Now he hasn't looked great at the plate, but he missed about a month of baseball, and it'll take a couple games for him to get his timing back. I think he's shown what he can do, and I have no reason to expect that he won't do that. So once he sort of, gets past that first step of being back on the team, I think he'll start to make a positive impact. Noelvi Marte is on his way back. He's on a rehab assignment right now, and he was playing out of his mind before that oblique injury popped up. So you hope that he can continue to do that and sort of take over the third base spot, which we've been not great at this season. We've had, sort of a Santiago Espinal, Christian Encarnacion Strand thing going on over there the past couple of weeks, and they're not really hitting at the weight you'd want them to. So if Noelvi Martin can come back and hit like he was before he got hurt, that improves this team so much, I think. We've got Hunter Green. He's throwing a couple live bullpen sessions or facing live hitters before he goes on a rehab assignment, but everything is going well with him. Graham Ashcraft, same thing. He's going to be on a rehab assignment probably within the next 2 weeks and be back post All-Star break, you'd hope. So we have all these guys working on making their way back to the team. And these are three guys who can make, well, and if you include Austin Hayes, four guys who can make a really big impact on this team in a positive way. And so getting them back will definitely help this team out. And it makes me hopeful that this isn't even the best version of the Reds. Um, Even though they've been playing some of their best, probably their best baseball of the season, this might not be the best version of this team. And that gives me hope that we're going to see a better second half than recent years and trends have shown us. So, I'm cautiously optimistic, I think. And I definitely feel better about this team at than I did at the checkpoint we did, after a month of the season. I think if you go back and listen to that episode, I was pretty doom and gloom about the Reds. That was right in the middle of our terrible offense and some pretty rough pitching too. And I probably was pretty down. I don't remember exactly, but I know I was probably pretty down. But I'm definitely feeling a lot better about this team at this checkpoint. And I think that just proves my earlier point that you can't get too high or too low when you analyze, a stretch of 20 games of baseball or even a stretch of 80 games of baseball because so much can change day to day, month to month in the game of baseball. But, I hope that some work is done at the deadline. This team really needs some bullpen help, and you sort of hope that the front office is willing to do that. Like I said, we're taking steps in the right direction, but, you know, it's going to be iffy as to whether or not this team can make the playoffs. as much as I want it to happen. The NL is a gauntlet this year. I mean, you look at the teams in the wild card and you look at the NL Central. The NL Central might be one of the best divisions in baseball this year somehow. And it's like this could be an 85 win team that doesn't make the playoffs realistically, which would suck. That would break my heart. But, it's a realistic possibility at this point. I think, it comes down to what does Austin Hayes, what does Noelvi Marte, what do those guys bring to the team when they come back healthy? Are they able to provide a spark? Are they able to be consistent forces in the lineup? And then also, what is this front office willing to do at the deadline? And that's going to segue us into our next segment here, where we're going to talk about the deadline a little bit. And I'll let you kick it off with the Guardians.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit early, quite frankly, to do some deadline talk, but I think the way that the Guardians have been playing, they're looking more and more like sellers by the day. And Emmanuel Clase seems to be the guy that is the most expendable for this team as far as stars go. If the Guardians want somebody who is going to be almost big league ready, like a prospect for hitting, who's almost big league ready and sell to a team that is really trying to improve their bullpen, Emmanuel Clase is a huge get. I mean, you look at 2016 when the Indians acquired Andrew Miller and gave up two of their top prospects. Andrew Miller helped them immensely get to that make that World Series run in 2016. Without Andrew Miller, I don't think they would have even come close to World Series. So Emmanuel Clase is somebody who can really give that team like such a huge boost, who already has a good bullpen, who just has an extra weapon in their back pocket. And he still has a pretty team friendly deal, so he's making 6.4 million next year and then 10 million the 2 years after that. So after 26, he has a team option with a $2 million buyout. So he'll be making $10 million both those 2 years. Um, but he's really looked kind of the last couple months in that 2024 form where he's had like a one and some change ERA the last like month or two. I don't have his exact stats pulled up, but his ERA was in the sixes in April, and now it's down to the low threes. So he's really come around this season, and I would love to see a good hitting prospect come out of an Emmanuel Clase trade if in fact the Guardians are completely out of it by the trade deadline. I think Clase is a great trade asset at this point. I think with if we drag our feet longer with keeping Clase around, then I think we might regret it. So his value is still sky high. So that's really the only guy that I really has some good trade value for the Guardians. I don't really think that the Guardians should bother trading anybody else at this
Yeah,
point. So either somebody is in their long-term picture or they just don't have enough trade value. So
right. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think the thing you said with Class A sort of strikes a chord with me because Reds fans saw it with Alexis Diaz. I mean, he was an all-star in 23. He was at the top of his game, one of the best closers in baseball. And then he fell apart the last 2 years, and we don't even get a big leaguer out of him. We get like a single A guy from the
Mhm.
Dodgers out of him, and it's just like, the Reds had offers for Alexis Diaz in 23. They didn't want to trade him, and now we're reaping the consequences of that. I mean, you could have had a guy who's ready to make a difference on this 2025 team if you trade him in 23. You don't, which, in hindsight was a bad move. It could have ended up being a good move too. I mean, maybe Diaz continues to be at that form and we have an all-star closer on this team, which I think this team needs, but you know, there's two sides to every coin, and I think you have to consider that when you're considering these trades of these bullpen arms, especially bullpen arms, I think, because
Mhm.
it's such a relief pitching is such a fickle thing.
Yeah.
You can be really good one year and then guys figure you out because a lot of bullpen guys really only have two pitches that they can throw well and
Hmm.
throw for strikes. And if guys figure that out, then you're sort of toast. So, it'll be interesting to see what the Guardians do with Class A, whether
Hmm.
it's a sort of an Alexis Diaz situation or not. For the Reds at the deadline, I think it's going to be hard to tell. I mean, we're still a month out and it's hard to tell what the team's going to do at the deadline, especially with this front office. You want them to be buyers, but this front office has shown time and time again that they're reluctant to go all in at the deadline. I think we saw that in 23, Like I said, um, we were right in that playoff picture in 2023 until the last day of the season, basically, and we didn't do anything at the deadline. And I think it came back to bite us. We ran out of bullpen depth, we ran out of starting pitching depth, and some injuries got us there at the end. And, it probably cost us a playoff berth because we're 1 or 2 wins away from making the playoffs that year. And so while I want this front office to go all in, I worry. I think back to that 2023 season when we were right there and they didn't do much of anything. And, you wonder if it's going to be the same old story again this year. If we are buyers, you know, I think it makes sense to be buyers because this team seems ready to compete. And maybe now that this team has proven that they're ready to compete, the front office is ready to move some more chips in. And I think if they are, the two biggest or the two best trade chips you have are Nick Martinez and Brady Singer, two reliable starting pitchers. They're proven big league arms. Both of them you're going to have to pay in the offseason. Martinez is on a 1 year deal and he's making 21 million this year, so you could offload some of that salary even if you trade him. And then Brady Singer, he's going to be, I think he's got a year of ARB left, so he'll be arbitration eligible this offseason. And then I think he's a free agent after that. So, it's two pitchers who you're going to have to pay or let walk in the offseason. So, why not try and get some trade value out of them at this deadline and see if you can get some help? I think the two biggest things this team needs are a really trustworthy back of the bullpen arm. Tony Santillan and Emilio Pagan are great, and Graham Ashcraft's going to be back soon. But Scott Barlow isn't it. Lyon Richardson isn't it. I think they've proven that a couple times this season. This bullpen also needs a lefty desperately. Taylor Rogers has been nothing short of horrible this season, and Sam Maul. They seem to have no faith in Sam Maul down in AAA. So you wonder if they need to go get a lefty specialist for the bullpen, and I think they could definitely get that with one of these starting pitchers and probably a little bit more. And then this team, I think, still needs uh, one more reliable bat. The with two of your better trade chips being starting pitchers, I think the Orioles are a great team to call. Guys like Ryan O'Hearn and Cedric Mullins come to mind, guys who are pretty good bats. Ryan O'Hearn is having a career year this year. So, can you go get him for a post trade deadline rental and see if he can help you make the playoffs? I think it's worth doing. Like I said, we still got a month. So, the wheels could fall off. The Reds could not win a game in July, and then they're sellers or they do nothing. So, but right now, I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to buy, and I definitely think at this point they should. But that's all the trade deadline stuff. I think we'll probably get into that more as things start to heat up as we get closer to that. But we'll get into our last segment here. We're going to do some first half MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year picks. First half just finished up, so we're gonna look at some guys who we think deserve the awards for the first half of the season. And Chris, I'll let you go ahead and kick it off if you want.
So for my AL MVP, I have Aaron Judge. So I think he's the very obvious candidate for the American League. He's put up 5.7 wins above replacement already. He's hitting 354 with an 1161 OPS. Kyle Raleigh, especially with how many responsibilities he has as a catcher, it's super impressive what he's done this year. But the season that Aaron Judge has put up really makes it super difficult to make it anybody other than him. But I think that wi- in a league that doesn't have Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani, Cal Raleigh would be like a unanimous MVP. So
Oh yeah.
it's just tough luck with the league that he's in. So and then for my NL MVP, this might stir the pot a little bit, but I have Pete Crow Armstrong. Um, Now let me explain myself. So Pete Crow Armstrong, while he hasn't had quite as well, not nearly as good of an offensive season as Shohei, he's put up 4.4 wins above replacement. He's played elite defense while putting up very, very good offense. I believe his OPS is near 1,000. Um, but Yeah, he's put up 4.4 wins above replacement versus Shohei putting up 4.0. Um, I think I'll put a caveat on my NL MVP pick. I think that Shohei has the best chance of winning the MVP for like the full season, given that he's pitching again. But I do think that Pete Crow Armstrong, just given his first half, just taken as a whole separate season, I think that Pete Crow Armstrong at this point is more deserving of the MVP. Um,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, all right. I will get into my MVPs here. AL MVP, I have no qualms with your pick. It's Aaron Judge. As much as I would love to see Cal Raleigh win the MVP because, it's someone who is an Aaron Judge and it's something different, which is exciting. And it's always cool to see a catcher win MVP because, like you said, they have so many responsibilities and catching really zaps your body. But Judge is just having another amazing season, and it's hard to give it to anyone other than him. My NL MVP, I do have to disagree though. I've got Shohei winning it. PCA does have more WAR, but Shohei's better in batting average, on base, slugging, OPS, OPS plus, and he has more home runs. Peter Armstrong's providing a lot of value with his defense that Shohei isn't providing, but I think with Shohei starting to pitch again, and I think just by value of being Shohei, he's being more valuable than Pete Crow Armstrong is, especially with all of the offensive stats being better. I mean, you take into account that the Dodgers pretty much knew Shohei was only going to hit for the first half of the season. They knew he wasn't going to pitch when they signed him, and so he's providing a lot more value for what he was expected to do, I think. Although Peter Armstrong is having an amazing season, I don't want to take anything away from him or say that he doesn't deserve his flowers because, yeah, I mean, he's having an insane season when you look at the level of defense that he's playing and what he's doing offensively too. It's definitely impressive, but I think my NL MVP is Shohei.
I'll provide another counter argument to this, and this might be I think this is kind of a hot take, but I think that the Dodgers being as loaded as they are, I think that that players on a less like loaded team should be considered a little bit more for the MVP,
Right.
just for the impact that they have on their team.
Yeah.
Um, the Cubs have Kyle Tucker and Pete Armstrong, who both been MVP candidates this year. Other than that, they have Ian Happ, who's been good.
Seiya Suzuki's been pretty good.
Seiya Suzuki's been good. Their team better than me. Nico Horners is good.
Yeah.
Michael Bush has been good. But anyway, um, they don't have the same star power as the Dodgers
Right.
do. And the Dodgers have Freddie Freeman. They have Mookie Betts. They have Max Muncy. Um, Tommy Edman was really good the first little month of the season. I'm trying to think who else. I'm probably missing. Teoscar
Yeah.
is a super feared hitter. So I think that Shohei, relative to his lineup, like he's probably the best hitter in the lineup still,
Mhm.
but I do think that the amount of value that Armstrong brings to his team is a little bit more than what Shohei brings. Just
Here's
because they split
yeah.
the load a little bit more.
Here's my counter argument to that counter argument, I guess, is that Mookie Betts is having a pretty rough year offensively, and I think Teoscar is too. I'll pull up the stats real quick, but I mean, sure the name recognition is there, but Mookie Betts is not the same Mookie Betts that he usually is. I mean, Teoscar is only batting 259. He's got a 115 OPS plus, but I think you would probably expect him to be better than that. Freddie Freeman's been hurt here and there this season. So the Dodgers lineup on paper might be better than the Cubs, but I think, as the season's played out, they might be fairly equal in terms of actual production. We'd have to look at the stats, I think, but you know, I see your point, but at the same time, I think Shohei is still providing that value with when you consider the Dodgers lineup as they're performing and not just in a vacuum.
Yeah, I think either way they are pretty close as far as their MVP
Yeah,
candidacy so far. And I think it is a closer race than people give it credit for. So I think
definitely.
that's kind of the closing note that I'll leave it as. So
Yeah. All right, we'll get into our Cy Youngs here. I'll let you kick it off with your two Cy Young picks.
Yeah, so this my AL Cy Young pick is maybe a little bit less popular of a pick, but it's Garrett Crochet. Um, he's put up a 2.06 ERA this year. He leads the league in strikeouts at 135. He's only thrown 109 innings, by the way, which is one of the best in all of baseball. Compared to Tarek Skubal, he has more innings pitched, more runs above replacement, and more strikeouts. And I feel like Skubal has gotten a lot more of the attention this year. Maybe because Skubal's on a better team, maybe kind of the name recognition thing. But Garrett Crochet the Red Sox aren't that good this year.
Mm,
And his record isn't that good. So I think he kind of gets lost in the shadow of, like a Skubal or a Max Fried, or like I don't know, Hunter Brown was in the Cy Young conversation for a little while. I know I'm missing a guy or two in there, but I think it is a little closer race for the Cy Young award in the American League.
yeah,
And a very obvious Cy Young so far in the National League is Paul Skeens. I think the only other person in the National League that gives Paul Skeens a run for his money is Zach Wheeler. And even then, Zach Wheeler's stats haven't been nearly as dominant as Paul Skeens. Skeens has put up a 2.12 ERA with a .9 WHIP. He has a 4-7 record, but this Pirates offense doesn't give him any run support. And yeah, I said in a previous episode, I think it's super easy to see through that Paul Skeens is while he hasn't struck out people at the rate that he has in the past, he's just been, I think, a better overall pitcher than last year. I think he's a little bit more mature in the way that he approaches guys. And I just think he's a better overall pitcher, quote unquote,
yeah,
than last year. So Paul Skeens is my pick for the Cy Young.
yeah. I'll get into mine, and I'll start with my NL Cy Young because it's the same as yours. It's Paul Skeens. I think there's an there's not really an argument to be made, but I think some people might try to argue that the record isn't there to be a Cy Young. But I think in recent years, the sort of mind of baseball has gone to the fact that pitcher wins and losses are sort of a they're not really a relevant stat as much as they used to be because it doesn't take a lot of things into account and you have to look at things more like ERA and whip and strikeouts and innings pitched and things like that when you're considering the value of a pitcher. So yeah, I'm my pick is Paul Skeens too. I did go back and forth a little bit with maybe Andrew Abbott, but I just don't think he's thrown the innings yet to be considered for it
He
because he
is
was
up
hurt
there.
for
I will give him that. He's had a great
yeah.
season.
He's put up 3.3 WAR already. I think it's the same amount of WAR as Zach Wheeler has. So he's definitely had a really good season, but I just don't think he has the innings yet. I think if he continues to pitch like this and stays healthy the rest of the year, there's a serious conversation about him at the end of the season, but he's got to continue to pitch like he has, and then we can have that conversation. But right now, I don't think it's realistic to have that conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
also Zach Wheeler has had a couple real clunkers of a start. So
yeah.
Paul Skeens didn't have a great start his last time out, but there have been a couple instances, Zach Wheeler's on my fantasy team. He
Mm,
he gave up 6 runs a couple times in a game, and um, that's inflated his ERA to 2.45, which is still elite, but
yeah.
I think Skeens has been better overall. So
Yeah. All right, my AL Cy Young, I do disagree with you though. I've got Max Fried as my AL Cy Young. He's second in pitcher WAR, he's second in ERA, and he's second in innings pitched. He's top five in WHIP and strikeouts. So I think if you go to Baseball Reference and you pull up the pitching leaderboards for the AL, I think you see Max Fried more at the top than you see Garrett Crochet. Um, Fried also has 10 wins. I know I just said that wins are kind of a silly stat, but if you want to look at wins, he has the most wins in the AL. I think he's pitching a touch better than Garrett Crochet, I think. So that's why I'm giving it to Crochet or Fried as opposed to Crochet in the AL.
yeah, I think that Max Fried has been very, very consistent this year, and
Right.
I think he's been one of, if not the most consistent pitchers in baseball. Fried is
Yeah.
also on my fantasy team, not to brag, but yeah, I've kept up with every start that he's thrown this
Yeah.
year. And yeah, he's been fantastic. I think Yeah, like you said, it is a really close race in the AL, and I think you can really make a legitimate argument for any of the Garrett Crochet, Tarek Skubal, Max Fried, any of those guys.
Yeah,
Lefties,
I would say,
it's a lefties league that we're in.
yeah, I would say
Uh,
even Hunter Brown a little bit.
yeah,
Maybe
Hunter,
has a little
yeah,
bit of a case. The innings aren't there yet, but
yeah.
I think, that there's at least an argument to be made for Hunter Brown if you want to make it. I don't necessarily want to, but yeah, I think, there's an
I think
argument to be made
he's
there.
I think he's a tier below where these other guys
Yeah,
are. He's still very, very good, but he's not quite like top tier yet.
right. Yeah,
So,
I think I would agree with that. All right,
mhm.
let's get into our Rookie of the Year award winners for the first half, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I believe we have the same rookie of the
Yeah.
year for both leagues. I think it's pretty obviously Jacob Wilson for the American League. He's hitting 340 this year, which is insane. He was hitting 360 a few weeks ago. So he's absolutely just kind of broken the league in terms of his bat to ball skills. It came out I think a week ago or so. There was a news article that he plays Fortnite before he goes to the field every day, and that he sort of attributed his Fortnite skills uh, to his hand-eye coordination, and his dad kind of backed him up a little bit, which was kind of cool. But um, yeah, he's been fantastic this year. He doesn't strike out and he doesn't walk, so he hits the ball. When the Guardians played against the A's, he hit into a billion double plays, but that's really his one weakness as a hitter. I think he does need to mature a little bit and learn the strike zone a little bit better, but
Mhm.
he just has elite bat to ball skills. Like I don't want to compare him to Tony Gwynn necessarily, but I think that his ceiling kind of rivals that. So.
Right.
I got Jacob Wilson, and then Drake Baldwin, a guy that I hadn't really paid much attention to because the Braves have kind of on that NL East they're there, but they're not like setting the world on fire. So Drake Baldwin as a catcher, he's put up an 829 OPS this year. And I like I've said, the catcher is a super demanding position, especially in this day and age with pitch com and all the film that's out on like every opposing hitter and stuff.
Mm.
That's a crazy job, and you're managing a whole pitching staff. And for a rookie to be taking that on while putting up an OPS over 800 is just super impressive. So I have Drake Baldwin kind of running away with the Rookie of the Year in the National League.
Yeah, I agree with both of your picks on these ones. I think the Rookie of the Year races are probably going to be the two least competitive when we get to the end of the year in awards. So yeah, Jacob Wilson in the AL. He's also put up two WAR and he's a 138 OPS plus. So he's not no disrespect to Luis Ariz, but he's not Luis Arizing his 340 batting average, so to speak. It's not like he's just blooping singles the other
Mm.
way and that's all he's doing, or getting balls to fall that maybe wouldn't all the time. He's hitting 340 and he's hitting um above league average in terms of OPS plus too. And Luis Ariz is a guy who usually sits right about league average with OPS plus, even though the average is there, the OPS plus isn't. And, OPS plus is king now in baseball. It seems like,
Mhm.
people don't care about average as much. So Jacob Wilson doing both things. Drake Baldwin in the NL, at least for right now, I think is my pick. Like you said, he's just, putting up a an above 800 OPS as a catcher as a rookie is really impressive. My pick probably would have gone to another Brave if we had done this 2 weeks ago. I think it would have been AJ Smith Shawver. He was having a really good year, and then his last two starts have been pretty disastrous. He only went three and then 2.2 innings in his last two starts. But I think he probably would have been my pick, before those last two starts. And then I think, while this is first half, I think it's worth mentioning that Chase Burns just got called up, and at the end of the season, he might be in that conversation. I mean, we saw it with Paul Skeens; he got called up
Mhm.
about this time last year, and then ended up winning Rookie of the Year. Chase Burns sort of on that same trajectory, at least career path wise. So we'll have to see what the stats look like, but I think he might be in that conversation come the end of the year.
I think you can make a better case for Jacob Mizorowski. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely
because
could see him being in that discussion too.
Yeah, because Jacob Mizorowski has like really good command and he throws like a 96 mile an hour slider, 102 mile an
Right.
hour fastball. So, um, the thing with both of them though is like you said, they're on innings limits.
Yeah,
So that might harm their chances at getting the rookie of the year. But I think that those two at the moment are making a really good case for themselves to kind of uh, come back and make a run for that rookie of the year nomination by the end of the season. So
definitely. Yeah. Well, that's where we'll leave you for this week. We'll be back next week to talk more baseball with you. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the YouTube, check us out on the YouTube. We're trying to get it going over there, and there's been talk of maybe starting some other things up with the podcast. So keep supporting us and we'll keep trying to build this thing. Thanks so much for listening to episode 23.
thank you.